Greetings again, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you, folks. My name is Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. For those of you who enjoyed the last conversation I had with the so enigmatic and illuminating Fernando Raul Castro Alvarez, we've got him back today, and we're going to have a good conversation today. I'm excited to talk. Last time Fernando was here, we talked a bit about some historical roots of the definitions of traditional astrology versus what we call modern application of astrology. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about some intricate details of Fernando's take on interpreting an astrology chart. Thank you so much again, Fernando, for hanging out with us today.
Thank you very much, Dustin, for inviting me once again to your channel. I hope people enjoy what we discussed today.
I'm very excited to have you here, pal. So for everybody watching, if you like what you're reading from me and Fernando, you can find Fernando on his channel, Fernando Raul Astrology. Am I right on that? Fernando Raul Astrology.
Yes, sir.
Very good, Fernando. So thanks for being with me here, buddy. Now, while we were talking in our last discussion, I think one of the things that has intrigued me in terms of how, I've been having a conversation with my audience about what you've called the Trans-Saturnian planets. I've heard that before. Some people call them the outer planets. The ones we're talking about are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, when I talk about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, maybe I'll give you my spiel, Fernando, and then I'd love for you to apply your consciousness to what I usually say. Essentially, how I've kind of come to understand, and this is how I talk about it, Fernando. So again, I'm going to give the caveat here that for everybody watching, it's something that I really like to do on my channel is I have an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion, and I express my feelings about what I feel on things. I've invited Fernando because Fernando is Sanat Makaraka, and you are a straight shooter. And I invite you to say what you really think about my expressions, because we can't see our own blind spots unless somebody points them out to us. You're really good at it, so I invite you to say whatever you feel, my friend.
Whatever I feel.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the vaccine mandates. Okay, let's talk about
no
that.
Kidding, eh?
No, I'm sorry.
I love it. Oh, believe me.
You're gonna get the platform.
Oh, no kidding, eh? Geez, all right, I'm out. Good old YouTube, huh? Freedom of information around here.
Yeah, you're Canadian. Yeah, you're Canadian. Yeah.
Oh, I'll get nailed to the wall if we go too far on that one.
Yeah, the police is gonna come to your house and gonna trash everything. Yeah.
Well, I've been good so far, so let's see how long we can keep it going.
We try.
Well, Fernando, so this is my spiel that I usually give for the outer planets. And what I usually say to my audience is that the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, have really only been discovered through the human eye and through human technology, probably within like the last 60, 70 years, 80 years, I think, because of the advent of modern telescopes. Now, it is my understanding that the rishis who understood and had the clairvoyance to understand astrology as it relates to the human soul, the recurring human soul evolution. These rishis understood that, as I understand it, the 7 Sapta-Grahas, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, these were the planets that heralded the chakras. And we're going to talk about how the rashis kind of reflect the chakras. And so these rishis, assumedly, there's no Sanskrit texts, there is no literature in Indian astronomy or astrology or the Vedas that talks distinctly about these bodies.
Correct.
Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, it is my understanding that it's very possible that the rishis who originally had the clairvoyance to conduct astrology might have actually had an understanding and an apprehension of these trans-Saturnian planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But if they did talk about them, lay astrologers of the future could not practice what they understood the rishis conveying when they talked about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. This is my very personal take on this, Fernando, is that just because lay astrologers did not use their eyes and see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, this isn't necessarily to say that Uranus and Neptune and Pluto couldn't have been useful figures for defining elements of karmic accumulation of some sort. So these outer planets could still be valid in what we would call a useful and even possibly traditional astronomical context. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I could see that it's like, ooh, I don't know if that's the right
that last thing. Yeah.
I understand, because maybe it wouldn't. All right. Well, so
no, don't worry about it.
Thanks,
I've heard
Fernando.
Before,
I'm with
so
you.
don't worry.
Good.
Yeah.
So this is my anticipation, is that these outer planets can still be valid arbiters of some kind of karmic significance. However, I don't think personally that they would, I don't think they fit in the chakras of astrology, but I think that having Uranus or Neptune or Pluto in a sign or a house might signify that there is a karmic evolutionary signification of that planet in that chakra. Let's say, in the swiftest example, if somebody has Pluto and Neptune in the sign of Capricorn, this might mean that the person's first chakra, which, as you and I am sure are going to talk about, Capricorn and Aquarius relate to the first chakra. It's possible that having, is that where you're at with that, Fernando?
Muladhara chakra.
Muladhara chakra, that's correct. So that'd be that first chakra. So for somebody to have an outer planet in Capricorn or Aquarius means that there is some kind of karmic signification of some kind of crystallized gestation that needs to be worked out relating to that chakra, but they don't have chakras in themselves. I don't believe that Uranus represents any sort of chakra. I don't believe that Neptune does, and I don't believe that Pluto does. But I believe that they might have significations for how a person would have the karma related to those chakras.
They do have.
So do you consider them no different than comets? A lot of people are about Chiron and Luna and Pallas and all these asteroids.
Vesta.
Right. So do you think that they're no different from those? Is that your general interpretation?
No. Let me go step by step.
Please, yes, Fernando. I think I've given my point. So why don't you go ahead and let me know what you think about what I've said.
So there are many different things here, because when we start talking about Trans-Saturnians, and what you're doing makes sense, because what you're doing is taking a modern thing and putting it, overlapping it on a tradition, and that's logical, but in the way in a certain way, it's just modern astrology. It's what most people who do Vedic astrology do today. They take traditional things and they mix it up with modern things. And this is just an example of it, of how we want to take something that's relatively new, the planets, the Trans-Saturnian planets, and want to overlap it with the chakra doctrines of the Rashis, which is very traditional, right? Which, by the way, are 6 and not 7.
Right.
But that's another thing. But the point is, because that 7th chakra, once again, is a modern idea that came about because of several things. But the thing is that this is what I mean when I say that most Vedic astrology today is modern astrology, because that idea that you are postulating, many other people have already done it in different ways. For example, Ernst Wilhelm, what he does is that he equalizes or makes some comparisons between the Trimurti and the Trans-Saturnians, the idea of the 3 lords, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and Vishnu. And I've seen other people, other Vedic astrologers, much more from another school than Ernst, obviously, but people who do the Trans-Saturnians and just talk about how important they are if they're really close to cusps or if they're really close to the
or a planet.
MC or the ascendant. So, there are many different approaches. There are many different approaches. So once again, the thing is that this is not stemming from tradition. This is stemming from a modern development. Now, let's go step by step because I have my notebook here and I have a few notes. So first of all, Trans-Saturnian, the outer planets, if in my experience, looking at the term in different languages, and mainly in Spanish, English, and German, there are different terms to talk about the Trans-Saturnians. And sometimes they overlap through languages, but what that entails is the confusion that exists about them because they are new.
Yes.
We don't have a homogeneous terminology to address them and so forth. But the thing is that this only shows by example the confusion that these things create. Now, certainly, we need to once again go back to etymology and go back to history. Trans-Saturnian, what does it mean? It means further on than Saturn or beyond Saturn,
yes,
right?
Beyond, yeah, I'd say, yeah.
And what do people think when they think about that and the Trans-Saturnians? They think about the sun being the center and us being the third rock and Saturn being the fourth, fifth, the sixth rock, right?
Rock, yeah.
And then you have like Uranus, and then you have Neptune, and then you have Pluto, or as I should say, after Neptune, you have all the other dwarf planets. And then you have the Kuiper belt, and then you have the Oort cloud, and then you have space, right?
And then
whatever.
Right, certainly.
And that is once again a modern conception. So if we're going to do traditional astrology, we got to go back to the essence of the culture. We got to be geocentric.
Yes.
And not only that, we have to understand what the spheres and the great chain of correspondences means. What it means is that you are connected directly through God. There is a chain of correspondences that is built upon hierarchies and laws, which comes down here to the sublunary sphere of the four elements, where everything dies, where everything grows and dies. And beyond that, the holy spheres are made of the quintessences, the fifth element, which is known as ether. But okay, in Jyotish is called Akasha, right? Or Akash. That is not to be confused with prana, which is kind of different, but it's more or less there are particular. The point is that the fifth element creates the space, but it also is that essence that lives beyond the sphere of the moon from a geocentric perspective, where everything's immortal, imperishable. So there is a chain that connects God Almighty to us, and that's how we come to this life. Our spirit goes down geocentrically, and it has the different spheres, and it takes up the energy, and then you go to a fetus. When does that happen? I don't know, but the idea is that life starts at the conception.
Gotcha.
And that is something that has always been stipulated throughout history. And then you're born and whatever, right? But the idea is that you need to be aware of the space and time in terms of the spheres, because you have the sphere of the moon, you have the sphere of Mercury, you have the sphere of Venus, you have the sphere of the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then you have the last one, which is the eighth sphere of the fixed stars. And that's what I was telling you in the last video. You have the fixed stars, and then the moving stars move in that background.
Those luminaries that are moving.
Correct. And then after the eighth sphere, you go beyond what we can perceive, which is the metaphysical. And then you go to the realm of the signs, and then you go to the realm of God and heaven. Heaven is there, moksha is there, which is the idea also of the lokas, right? It alludes to that idea also, which once again is a tradition.
Yeah, the lokas.
Yes, lokas. And the lokas down, which would be the equivalent of Hades or hell, right? But lokas up is the equivalent of the celestial spheres and the metaphysical. Now, that is the geocentric outlook on life. That is the outlook that people had from the beginning of history till recently, till 200 years ago. So when you talk about Trans-Saturnian, you got to place yourself there. And people will say, well, Fernando, we have evolved, we have changed. No, because evolution does not exist in the Darwinian's collective terms. What does exist is savagery. What does exist is barbarity.
Mhm.
What does exist is involution, where man thinks that he can live without God,
Without
where he
form,
thinks that
or without
where he
law.
thinks that good and where good and bad is relative, and many times it is, but real good exists and real bad exists.
Certainly.
Where everything is relative. No. There is something perennial about this that is unchangeable and immortal in terms of where we are in relationship to God. Because if you take that away, then you're just a small rock in a star giving a whole revolution around the center of a galaxy, and a galaxy is growing, and then you end up in nihilism, where nothing is nothing.
Yeah, I'd love to throw a point in here, Fernando, because
yes, go ahead.
Oftentimes in my cosmic wanderings, I think about this fact that there are so many galaxies out there, infinites of galaxies, infinites of suns with planets revolving around them. The Vedic concept of human consciousness is that we were bound to unfold our 2 legs and a torso and arms and a head through a galactic system that reflects the inherent unfoldment of spirit and soul and consciousness. So we as humans, we look up and we see it's amazing that an Aries, someone born in Aries rising, relates to this planet called Mars, which we actually have in our galaxy. Some people say that astrology is something, we look at the divinity. What do you describe the divine consciousness as? We point at astrology because that's the galactic system that we have. So some people might say, in the same way that we can anthropomorphize God to be a human, but God might not actually be a human. We just think so because we're humans. In the same way, someone might say, someone points at astrology and says the divinity has 6 chakras, and the 6 chakras relate to planets, and that, we could point at our galaxy and say that it's divine, but maybe we're anthropomorphizing it. Personally, though, as I'm sure you'll agree with me, Fernando, we're not anthropomorphizing. Divinity has the tenets of Jyotish always. And I think on any other galaxy where human consciousness is going to grow, there has to be a Saturn, a Jupiter, a Venus, a Mercury, a Mars, a Sun, and a Moon. And they're going to revolve in a way to generate the same type of karma that we have on our planet. But another galaxy, while every galaxy is going to have the Sapta-Grahas, maybe each galaxy might have different background karmas that it needs to work through. Maybe this is why we have a Uranus and a Neptune and a Pluto, is because while the Sapta-Grahas reflect a perennial form of karmic evolution that every species needs to move through, our galaxy in particular has Pallas, it has Chiron, it has Uranus, it has Neptune, and it has Pluto. And this might mean something specific to our karma, but the form that those outer planets are going to move through is the same old Vedic story. Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. So what do you think about everything that I just said, Fernando?
Well, the thing is that life and consciousness only exist here in the world that we live upon. It does not exist in other places because life only exists on Earth.
You don't believe in extraterrestrials?
No, aliens do not exist. What does exist are spirits, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to realize that
unmanifested spirits, we could say.
Well, you can call them daimons or nagas or angels or demons, but it's the idea, or genes. It's the idea of spirits, right? Yep. Unincarnated, disincarnated, conscious,
disincarnate. Yeah.
But no, life only exists here, and we have no evidence of intelligent life, and we're not gonna have it. And if we have it, we should be very worried about it because it's probably gonna be a fake global psyop thing like the one we're just having right now.
Interesting.
But the thing is that life only exists here, and that is the conception, the traditional conception that predominates in all traditions and in all religions. Okay. The idea of outer planets or galaxies that does not exist. What exists is superior planes within the idea of lokas, within the idea of moksha, within the idea of heaven, but also the idea of not, going up, but going down. The idea of hell, the idea of Hades, the idea of other lokas, which are within the earth, right? So that is the traditional conception. Once again, everything you told me is just an expression of the modern ethos, right? Which is not part of astrology, because astrology is part of the traditional ethos. Now, what I wanted to say about the model that I was speaking about.
Yeah, go ahead, because I think I wanted to give my idea, but why don't you go ahead and continue on the train of thought that you had there, Fernando?
I don't know if you've ever seen these representation of the globus cruci here, which is basically when you see a painting in the medieval part or Renaissance or even Baroque, where there's a king and he has like a globe with a cross on top of it, like kings used to have that. That's basically a globus cruci here. It's basically the conception of the geocentric world. It's like an onion, but at the top you have the cross because God is in the top. That's the idea of the geocentric model. And that's also more or less the idea of the Vedic model, which is the idea of the lokas and how the planets revolve around us from a geocentric point of view in different chariots and all that. Okay. So we have to take into consideration, where does the Trans-Saturnian fit in this scheme? It does not fit in this scheme because for thousands of years, men did not need the Trans-Saturnians, and they still don't need them. Like a whole lot of a bunch of other modern things that we don't need today, that further complicates life and creates chaos, without getting into a metaphysical or theological discussion about what that entails. But the idea is, how can you fit the Trans-Saturnian between the cosmology of ancient rishis? You can't. How can you fit the Trans-Saturnians within the ancient cosmology of the Hellenistics, of the Muslims, of the Christians? You can't. You cannot do that. You can only do that in a world where modernity and nihilism is the prime, thing that moves things. Because if everything's relative, if everything's subjective, then, I can stick things where they can't be, right?
Yes,
because it's okay, it's normal.
Although I am inclined to think that you can still apply the anti-nihilism of an absolute truth given in traditional astrology as a basic point of reference for the basic reading of astrology. I mean, to be fair, I hardly ever use the Trans-Saturnian planets in readings. But if anybody,
I'm gonna get there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Because I guess my general idea is that I don't necessarily think that I understand what you mean, which is that not the nihilism of modernity can say that anything can be really, anyone can pick their favorite fact, which is a really scary thing, right? Now, just because we can nihilistically apply the outer planets in a way that we could say that they completely overtake the logic of traditional Jyotish. But my perspective is that I hug the traditional Jyotish strongly first. And then I think that these Trans-Saturnians can add interest to what is essentially the main picture.
Yeah, I'm going to get there.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to get there because I think what I'm going to say relates to what you're saying, but it's not, it's not in a positive way. It's in a very negative way.
Gotcha.
But what you're saying is the same thing I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it in a very negative way, which is going to have nefarious circumstances. The point is that within this geocentric model, there's no place for them. And not only that, the idea is why are you going to put them there if you already have all the tools and all the significators you need to explain what is going on? So if those planets are going to be included, they should include it in a model where they cannot be included, like doing the exception, right? They have to represent something that is not there already, but everything is there already. Now, we're going to leave that in the corner, and we're going to touch upon that later on, because that's part of what I was going to say later on, because they do have significators, but they're nefarious, right?
Okay.
So, but we're going to talk about that later on. But the point is that within the geocentric model, you cannot put the Trans-Saturnians in them. You cannot, because
I think we're speaking the same language.
Because if you do that, it breaks. It just disintegrates, like the idea of giving Uranus Aquarius or Neptune Pisces. That's just ridiculous, right? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of things going on. But the thing is that it can't be done. There's no reason to do it, and there's nothing new that it's gonna put on the table. Right? We're gonna talk about that third point later on, but the point is that you cannot have that. Now, historically speaking, we gotta go back to the idea of the etymology and the history. Now, we've talked about the Trans-Saturnian. They're far away, but more than Trans-Saturnian from a heliocentric point of view, it's Trans-Saturnian from a geocentric point of view. They are farther away than the seventh sphere, so they got to be in the fixed stars, but the fixed stars are fixed, and you can see the fixed stars, right? You can't see Uranus, you can't see Neptune, you can't see Pluto. That's why they weren't invented. Why? Because it's something very recent. Uranus was discovered by William Herschel in 1781. Neptune it's a bit tricky, but it was in the 1840s or 1850s by two different guys, a French guy and a German guy. And then we just celebrated, I think it was the 90th today or yesterday, the 90th anniversary of Pluto, which was discovered by an American in 19 something, 19, I don't know, in 1920, no, 20s, 30s, 20, I think it's 29, 30, or I might be mistaken. But the point is that, you know, those three have been discovered because of recent technological advances in telescope technology. And they have only been discovered within modernity and its anomalous situation concerning everything I have spoken so far in this and the previous video. So we have to take them into consideration as a manifestation of modernity, just like the asteroids, which have no importance in astrology, or no importance within the traditional perspective. We have to take that into consideration with the heliocentric model. We have to take that into consideration with, you know, other modern extrapolations that we get from astrology, because they are not part of the tradition. They are based in things that are not associated to the truth, to the absolute truth that we talked about before.
I do see this, and it's an important point to make, because it's really the basic constituents of the human consciousness alchemy of spiritual growth and of enlightenment do not involve the outer planets. You cannot get to enlightenment by holding on to any thought of one of the outer planets. I think that the only way that you can come to self-realization is through the Sapta-Grahas.
You come to self-realization through your relationship with God.
Yes,
I agree and the planets, well, they're part of that, but in reality, you don't need astrology. You just need the relationship with God.
Wonderful. I'm with you on that, Fernando.
And you know, you see that in India, you see that in Christianity, you see that in Islam. It's the idea of ascetics. It's the idea of sacrifice. It's the idea of prayer, contemplation, meditation. And you know, astrology is
bigger than yourself.
And to achieve moksha, to achieve the kingdom of heaven, it's the same thing. You know, theologically, it's not the same thing, but metaphysically, it's more or less the same thing from the traditional perspective. The idea of transcendence is just surviving death, you know, getting immortality and not perishing, not going to hell, not going to reincarnation, not going through, you know, another cycle or another punishment, you know. That's the idea. So once again, coming back to the Trans-Saturnians, there is no need for them. You can't make them fit in the model we have. So why do we use them? We use them because modern astrology is the main astrology today. Because there are many people who are not part of a tradition. They do not see what astrology represent, which is once again the logos of the astros. You cannot see the outer planets. You can only see them through telescopes, just as you cannot see galaxies far away, although you could see some.
Thinking about the fact that Jyotish really has always been a science of light, as it's traditionally defined.
Correct.
That I think that really, you know, at some level, we can only lean on the cognition given in the symbols that we're using. Because for me to try and argue that the outer planets are anything, I think
when you've never seen them, when you've never seen them before. I've only seen Uranus, and I saw it through a telescope. but you know, people who, and I'm not talking about you, but people who defend the Trans-Saturnians and talk a lot about them, they've never seen them. And many people have not even seen the real planets who practice astrology. And you can see them. I mean, you can go out tonight and maybe you'll see one or two. But the point is that you don't see them. They only exist on your head, and they only exist in photographs. And they only exist in videos. I mean, it's not there, but they are there, and we're going to talk about that. But the point is that they don't fit. We don't need them. You can't see them. So why do we have them? Well, we have them because we don't know astrology, because we don't know God. We don't know the tradition, and we're just looking for things like other people look for other things. I don't know, people who buy cars, people who like food, people who like the NBA. You know, we're just looking for something to grasp onto. But once we realize the tradition, once we realize a lot of the things that I told you, you start to see things in a different way, which is, you know, a little bit complicated and cumbersome from a social perspective, because, you know, in the end, it's a war against truth, right? So if you start talking truth, like so many, you know, wise people have said throughout history, you know, people are going to go against you. And the idea of the Trans-Saturnians is just, you know, a little bitty tiny bit of what this means. Now, taking that, the significations, which I have been postponing till now.
Sure.
So we have to think now. We can't see them. They don't fit. And at the same time, you know, we don't need them. Then why are they there? How can we use them now? Let's do, before we get into that, we have to do a separation. Okay. Neptune and Uranus are gassy giants who are out there apparently, but Pluto is just one of several. You know, it's just one of several dwarf planets. That's why it was demoted a few years ago. Because right now we have objects that are bigger than Pluto, and we don't consider them. Their orbits are erratic around the sun. So, you know, from an modern astronomical perspective, we should just take out Pluto because it's not there. And a lot of people are going to say, no, how can you do that? Whatever. No, the point is it's not astronomically feasible. It's not even feasible within the modern paradigms to include Pluto. You know, people include Pluto because, you know, I feel like it, because it's cool, because it makes me feel happy.
I feel Plutonian.
But that's not, you know, feelings are your opinions, but that does not mean it's truth. If you see 2 + 2, it's 4. If you think 2 + 2 is 5 because it makes you feel good, well, it makes you feel good, but you cannot expect other people to
roll with
accept
it just
that
because you feel like it.
And, you know, and that's something that we're talking about astrology, that we can extrapolate to a whole bunch of other social issues, which we're not going to get into. But here we see this in astrology here. So, you know, start thinking about the parallels that I just alluded to. But the point is that we must divide Neptune and Uranus from Pluto because of this. Now,
cool.
Neptune and Uranus are planets. They're out there. You can't see them with telescopes. So, you know, giving leisure here and giving, you know, the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
You should not use them in astrology. Point. Now, if they're there, what can be their function? Well, their function is that their significators are modern significators. And as a consequence, they are antithetical to tradition. Now, Uranus and Neptune might allude to things that only exist in modernity, which is the period, which is, from a traditional perspective, today is the real dark ages. Today is the real age of ignorance. So Uranus and Neptune are going to represent that. They're going to represent, you know, and things that did not exist before, like electricity, the idea of universality in terms of rights, which in the end, it's not true. It's that we're all slaves now. There are no kings, you know, it's a society of slaves. The idea
no kings at all, not even, there used to be kings and then slaves, and now it's all slaves.
Because when you take out God, then you take the king, then you take then you think the royalty, the royals, then you take the bourgeoisie, then you take the workers, then you go to the pariahs, right? You go to the women, the transvestites, the animals, and then you go to the animals, and then you go to the plants, and then you go to and it's an involution because we don't have that hierarchy. See? And before, everything was connected through that correspondent of being and the chain of being. That's tradition. That's traditional thought. And that was the way it was in India. You had castes. For example, Shudras would never know how to read, write. They would never know Jyotish.
Right.
Vaishyas probably didn't know Jyotish, probably didn't know how to read. They probably knew how to count. Yeah, Kshatriyas, probably not necessarily Jyotish, but they kind of probably knew how to read, some of them. And finally, you have the Brahmins, which was the elite, mainly men who studied and learned. And that was the way it was done until very recently, until modern astrology. Now, the significators of Uranus and Neptune should apply to that, but they do not and cannot be applied to a natal chart, because a natal chart is a person. You could, and this is something I've spoken to colleagues of mine, you could theoretically put them within mundane astrology, which is the astrology of the collectives.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about right now how you can see Uranus and Taurus is bringing this technology of the individual erotic enjoyment into the world in a way. But this would mean in an individual natal chart, we would probably be throwing ourselves away from truth by having fun trying to apply Uranus and Taurus to a person's natal chart,
because there's nothing to hang on.
There's nothing. Yeah, I'm with you on that. You know, like when we see Mars in Taurus, we know that Mars has an elemental nature, which is being variegated by the elemental nature of Taurus. Uranus does not have, like, it's not connected to the Panchatattvas. It's not connected.
It's not connected to anything. It does not exist.
Right.
It only exists through a telescope.
Cool.
And if you see it through a normal telescope, even though seeing planets through a telescope is a very magical experience, to be honest with you, when you see Uranus, and when I saw it, I was impressed. It's just like a dot, a gray dot. I mean, they don't exist. That's why you can't not apply them to a natal chart, in my opinion. You could apply them to mundane astrology. There was a French astrologer called André Barbeau who worked with them and kind of did some hypothetical ideas of how Uranus was more of a liberal planet, and well, that's the Spanish term, more of a conservative liberal planet, more paleo libertarian. You know, the idea of how libertarianism.
It's like
liberal.
Libertarian is closer to what you're thinking.
Politically speaking, libertarian. While Neptune was more of totalitarian planet. You know, there are many hypotheses. There are many other people. André Barbeau is one of the most serious guys. But the idea is that you could extrapolate them to the collective. But once again, from the traditional perspective, those significators are going to be very nefarious, very bad.
Well, when you think about it, you know, if these planets, we're talking about them as lacking, I think the closest thing that I can describe to what you're trying to say is that these outer planets lack significations of elemental panchatattva.
Not only
substance.
That's part of it.
Okay, because
they lack also the idea of correspondences through the tema mundi in terms of the signs.
Totally.
They lack also in terms of angles and hence aspects, because the aspect doctrine is constructed through the 7 planets. So you cannot add aspects to Uranus because it's not there.
Once you start, it might not even. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, astronomically,
there's absolutely nothing to tie them to the 7 planets. Now, in terms of the revolutions, specifically Neptune and Uranus, forget about Pluto, forget about the Pluto return, which people are talking now. That's just ridiculous. Like people, you're going to see 10 videos and 10 people are going to say different things. Probably some particularities are going to stand out as homogeneous, but they're going to be different things because it's just modern astrology. Now, the thing with the outer planets is that, first of all, we just know them for 150 years. So these nefarious significations, you know, we got to see how they develop. But at the same time, you know, it's kind of weird. That's why you shouldn't use them, because in the end, once again, the nefariousness of those significations can be seen through the chronocrators, which are Jupiter and Saturn, which is how we used to do mundane astrology. And by the way, we just started a 200-year period with the great conjunctions right now. And we're in the middle part of a 1,400-year cycle, which probably started in the Reformation and discovery of America.
And is that Uranus and Neptune conjunction?
No. It's the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter.
Oh, okay.
There are no systems of Uranus and Neptune. I mean,
gotcha.
People say they can imagine things and conjunctions and oppositions,
right,
but it doesn't make sense, because you cannot do conjunction and oppositions with Uranus and Neptune, because you can't see the conjunction.
Yes.
And at the same time, the doctrine of aspects is based upon only the 7 planets. So once again, these are just Uranus and Neptune are like talismans. They're just like effigies. They're just like symbols of the nefariousness of modernity today. And in the end, if you're going to use them from a mundane perspective, what they're going to represent, first of all, they got to represent things that are not yet represented through the 7 planets. And honestly, that is very tough, because the planets already represent everything. Right. So they got to represent particular things that are only seen now. And the thing is that the things that are seen now, it's not that they are novel. It's not that they are brand new, because there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's the same.
Beat me to
tradition.
Yep.
We don't change. It's the same thing. The only thing that changes is the tools that we have and other things. So even though they might represent nefarious significators, those significators can also be seen through Mars, Saturn, and the rest of the planets, right? So once again, I believe that in essence, to finish this part, Uranus and Neptune, which I've already said in various Spanish videos of mine, are just the representation of modernity. So as long as we use them or acknowledge them, modernity is going to be with us. So the idea is that if you abolish the idea of Trans-Saturnians, then the idea of modernity will just change or start changing due to the doctrine of how talismans work, or of the doctrine of how magical objects work in terms of how you create.
All right. If I'm reading you correctly on the talisman thing, I could wear a talisman that has the Om symbol on it, and it has no power really in it. But when I walk around, people are seeing that, and it does have an effect.
Yes, but talismans entails a ceremony of consecration and a creation in a specific moment. If that Om sign followed those, what you're talking about, if it follows those steps, then it is a talisman. But if it does not, it's not a talisman. Just
then
a
it's
symbol.
Just a symbol, right?
Correct.
Cool.
So in a way, imagine that. Once again, let me use another analogy. It's the idea of Thor and the hammer, of how Thor thought that the hammer made him powerful, but then he breaks the hammer and then he realizes, wait, I'm cool. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, we don't realize that the planet, the Trans-Saturnians, is what makes them. No, you don't need them. You already have the power within you. So that's the idea, that if you forget that, I know it's a very cartoonish
that's good.
metaphor,
that was good,
but it just came up to my head. But the idea is that if from a traditional perspective, if you just abolish that, then you can really, from a reactionary traditional perspective, which is more social and less astrological, you can go back or try to reinstitute what the traditional world was. And once we've gone all through this period of modernity, right? But as long as you hold to the Trans-Saturnians, that thing is going to continue. But in terms of the astrological thing, we're just going to be further devolving, further devolving, and in 100 years, probably we're not going to talk about Mars ruling Aries or Venus ruling Taurus, although people are going to remember that in that time, hopefully. But people are just going to say, no, Vesta rules Aries, and Chiron is ruler of Taurus and all that. That's the idea of modern astrology. It's always becoming. It's not. It is not. It's not being. It's always becoming, and it's always changing, and it's always devolving. And in the past, that was called barbarity. That was called involution. Today, it is called progress. So that is what I wanted to say about the Trans-Saturnian. And let me finish exactly. That's that's what I want to say about Trans-Saturnians.
Very good. Totally, Fernando. That totally makes sense to me. And it makes sense to me that if people push too hard for these Trans-Saturnian planets to be primary in any sort of way, it's going to be hard to consider them as it can be distracting.
Impossible. It's impossible to consider them if you really think about the precepts. But people say, well, no, it's not like that, because in my opinion, in my experience, and I respect that.
I almost see,
but
Fernando,
that is not fact. That is not fact,
like,
right?
What's coming really to my brain right here is you're talking about Uranus and Neptune being these fun instigations of modernity. So if we were to talk about like the
fun, you said fun? No, I
maybe fun's not the right word, because that's certainly not what you said.
It's not the right word.
I'm with you, brother. So more of what I'm trying to say here is that I think a lot of people, let's call it this carousel thing. We all, as humans, we have basic needs that we need in order to develop holistic wellness. And if we jump on a carousel and we go wee all day, fun, we are going to be neglecting the holistic needs of our energy apparatus that we've been
That's like 80% of that industry. That's like 80% of that industry.
I get it. And what I think is interesting is that I think modern people can have fun talking about this as a secondary externalized limb, where Uranus is in Taurus. Maybe this means something for the Bitcoins. They're all going to be focused on this and this and this and this. And maybe people of modernity can play with these things as an external secondary limb. But for anybody who's trying to have a basic sense of the holistic needs of their energy body, skip the Trans-Saturnians.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Right? Have a consciousness of what your energy field actually operates as it always has traditionally. And then from there, have the fun that you want to have, but don't let it distract you from the main body of Jyotish.
And let me say something else
please.
An idea came up from what you just said, that many times modern astrology pushes the Trans-Saturnians or transpersonal or outer planets as a main instead of a secondary thing. And unfortunately, that deviates students from the basics.
Yes,
and unfortunately, that they start learning astrology through the Trans-Saturnians instead of learning it from the basics. So many times, it's a distraction from really getting to know astrology from a real perspective of the basics and the tradition.
And so would you say that probably, I think most people in Vedic consciousness, at least, tends to lean pretty hard on ancient Sanskrit astrological and astronomical texts, such as Parashara being probably the kingpin, but he's just his own system. So there's Parashara, there's Jaimini, there's all these various Vedic texts, at least, in terms of the Vedic tradition. In Hellenistic astrology, they have their own texts. Even the ancient Egyptian texts have their own derivation of these. And many of these can still kind of be wish-washy and sort of have cultural biases that don't reflect the true transcendental sense of absolute truth. So I guess my idea that I'm trying to stay here is that it's probably a good thing when you are considering what we call Vedic. I've lost my train of thought, but I think my point here is that I can see how these planets do not have the same, especially because they're not written in Parashara or any of these texts. I did want to ask you, when you go by text,
you can't see them. They don't exist. You can't, from a basic organic, which we will not allude to it as homogeneous to primitivity or being primitive. You can't see them. And they were never there. You still can't see them. You will never. Maybe you can see Uranus in very, very, very dark
with
skies,
light in a certain way.
In the middle of the Sahara. You got to be in a really, really dark place to see it, and it's just in certain times of the year. But and certain times of its revolution, right? Because if it's behind something, you will not see it. But of another planet like Saturn or whatever. But the point is, which is what happened ironically to Galileo. Supposedly Galileo, when he started seeing the moons of Jupiter, apparently he discovered Neptune or Uranus, I think, but he thought it was a moon of Jupiter, because at that moment, Jupiter and Uranus or Neptune wasn't the same sign. But that's just a historical,
very cool,
a historical, cute
story or whatever.
Story. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That's good, Fernando.
What I mean to say is that they're not there. I mean, and this is something that people have to understand it. And if they are there, it's from a heliocentric perspective. And if they're there, it's because you see them through pictures and through video, audio visual material. Good. It's all intangible. It's all secondary through machines, through perspectives, through things that were not autonomous, that were not primary within the tradition of astrology.
Very good.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to sound like a broken record. So
I was just thinking that not that you're sounding like a broken record.
Yeah.
I'm looking at our time, and we've gone into about an hour on this conversation.
Cool.
So I think that was very useful. I think that
Sure.
the people in my audience are going to get something out of it. So what do you say that we call her one here, Fernando? And I did want to ask, if you've still got a little bit of time, you down to do one more video between the two?
No, I want to eat.
Yeah, I'm getting there too. I could go forever, and I know you could too, but
but you look like you don't eat a lot. Yeah.
I don't eat enough, so I'm gonna take your advice and go and eat something too. Okay, so Fernando, my dude,
I eat a lot. I eat a lot.
I'm trying to get into that, to be honest with you. I got a bad metabolism that just burns food. So
no, I also have a bad metabolism in terms that I get fat really quick.
Oh wow, mine's the opposite. Mine goes like crazy. I should be eating more.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I will say that. Well, thank you, Fernando. Gosh, you sound like I feel like I'm talking to my mom. You're too thin, honey. But it always comes from love, my friend. Fernando, you have been such a good sport hanging out with me in these last two sessions. For everybody watching, this is Fernando Raul Astrology. I think that you're one of the great guys talking about philosophy, theology, talking about the bare bones that people don't talk about. And I really appreciate you coming on to my show and illuminating us.
Thank you. No, thank you, Dustin. And I hope we can continue this and repeat this in another video in the further future.
Sure. And I'll stay in touch with you. And if you got time, we'll make it happen.
Sure.
Okay. For everybody watching, check out Fernando Raul Astrology, and we've got more fun videos to come. Once a month, I'm doing more of these interviews. Thanks so much for coming, Fernando.
Take care.
Take care.